The wind howled across the desolate Yorkshire moors. A chill, sharper than any winter's bite, settled deep in my bones. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your soul, whispering tales of things best left undisturbed. This place, with its eerie beauty and haunting silence, held a secret whispered in hushed tones in the local pub, a secret that made even the bravest soul shiver. I'd always dismissed the stories as folklore, mere ghost stories to frighten tourists and children. But now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, grotesque shadows across the heather, doubt gnawed at my resolve. The locals called it Siren Head, a thing of nightmares, they said, lurking in the mist, waiting. I pulled my coat tighter around me, a futile attempt to ward off the encroaching cold and the growing unease within me. What was I doing here alone as darkness crept across the land? Foolish pride, perhaps, or maybe a morbid curiosity that had finally gotten the better of me. Don't be a fool, old Maggie had warned me, her voice raspy with age and too much ale. The Siren Head, it ain't no fairy tale. It's real right enough. She'd spat on the floor of the pub, her rheumy eyes boring into mine. It lures you in with its cries, makes you think someone's in trouble, then it catches you. I'd scoffed at the time, dismissing her words as the ramblings of an old woman. But now, out here in the deepening twilight, her words echoed in my ears, chilling me to the core. The silence was absolute, broken only by the mournful cry of the wind, a sound that seemed to mimic human suffering. The locals said it was a creature of the mist, appearing and disappearing at will. A tall, skeletal figure, they said, with a rusty metal pole for a spine and for a head, two sirens facing each other, their grills twisted into grotesque parodies of human faces. But it was the sound that was its deadliest weapon. They said the sirens could mimic any sound perfectly, from the cries of a lost child to the desperate pleas for help of a dying man. And once you heard it, you were drawn to it, powerless to resist its call. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the image from my mind. It was just a story, a silly story. There was no such thing as Siren Head. I'd come to the Yorkshire moors seeking solace, a break from the noise and chaos of city life. A writer, they called me, though inspiration had abandoned me of late, leaving me with nothing but a looming deadline and a head full of cobwebs. The solitude of the moors, I'd thought, would clear my head, offer me the peace I craved. How naive I'd been. The path ahead was growing dark, the last vestiges of daylight fading fast. I should turn back, I knew that. Head back to the village, to the warm hearth and comforting ale of the dog and duck. But something held me back, a strange compulsion to continue, as if something was drawing me further and further into the heart of the moors. The wind picked up, swirling around me like a living thing. Or was it my imagination? Was I losing my mind out here in this desolate landscape? I stopped, breathing heavily, my heart pounding against my ribs. I needed to get a grip. It was just the wind, just the isolation playing tricks on my mind. Then I heard it, a faint sound at first, carried on the wind. A child's cry, thin and reedy, filled with terror. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. It couldn't be. Could it? I strained my ears, listening intently. There it was again, the cry, closer now, more insistent. A primal fear gripped me, urging me to flee, to run while I still could, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, my body refusing to obey the dictates of my mind. The cry came again, closer still. It was a sound of pure anguish, a sound that seemed to claw at the edges of my sanity. I told myself it was a bird, a fox cub perhaps, its leg caught in a trap, anything but what I knew in my heart it must be. The wind seemed to sigh around me, carrying with it a new sound, a low, mournful moan like the groan of tortured metal. It seemed to emanate from the very air itself, surrounding me, suffocating me. There was no escape. Section 5. Face to face, The mist was thickening, rolling in from the east like a suffocating blanket. Visibility was down to a few feet. I stumbled forward, my heart pounding in my chest, the child's cries echoing in my ears. And then I saw it, a towering figure, silhouetted against the dying light. It was taller than any man, impossibly tall, its limbs grotesquely elongated, skeletal. Two rusted sirens, their grills contorted into nightmarish visages, sat atop its spindly frame where a head should be. The sirens swiveled, fixing their gaze upon me. A low hum emanated from them, a sound that vibrated in my very bones. The child's cries intensified, becoming a piercing shriek that seemed to tear at my eardrums. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there, frozen in place by terror, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I was paralyzed, trapped in the grip of a nightmare. Section 6. Retreat into Madness. The next few hours were a blur. I remember stumbling blindly through the mist, the child's screams echoing in my ears, the mournful groan of the sirens never far behind. I ran until I could run no more, collapsing in a heap on the cold, unforgiving ground. When I finally came to my senses, the sun was high in the sky. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the isolation of the moors? But even as I clung to this sliver of hope, I knew deep down that it had been no dream. The terror that gripped me was too real, the memory of those twisted sirens too vivid to be anything but real. I stumbled back to the village, a broken man. My clothes were torn, my face covered in scratches, my eyes wide with a terror I could not mask. The villagers took one look at me and ushered me inside the Dog and Duck, plying me with whiskey and hushed whispers. Section 7. A Glimmer of Hope. You saw it then? Old Maggie said, her voice barely a whisper. I could only nod, unable to speak the words that would give credence to the nightmare that haunted me. The villagers told me I was lucky to be alive. Most who encountered the Siren Head were never seen again, their fates unknown. They said it fed on fear, on the terror of its victims. And I had looked upon its face and lived to tell the tale. But the terror that clung to me was a heavy burden to bear. The memory of that night haunted my waking hours, and the nightmares that plagued my sleep were even worse. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that the Siren Head was out there, somewhere in the mist, waiting for me. I tried to leave the village, to put as much distance between myself and the moors as I could. But something always drew me back, an unseen force, pulling me towards the very thing I feared most. Section 8. The Inevitable. It happened again a year to the day after my first encounter. The same bone-chilling wind, the same eerie silence, the same blood-curdling cries echoing across the moors. And then the mist rolling in like a shroud, engulfing everything in its path. This time I didn't even try to run. I knew it was futile. The Siren Head had chosen me and there was no escape. I stood there in the middle of the moors as the mist swirled around me and waited for the inevitable, and then through the mist I saw it, the towering figure, its sirens blazing, its metallic groan sending shivers down my spine. It moved towards me slowly, deliberately, as if savoring my terror. This time the sirens were silent, but I could hear its voice inside my head, cold and emotionless, whispering my name. Section 9. Alone. They found my body on the moors the next morning, or what was left of it. The villagers said it was the Siren Head's doing. They said it had sucked the life out of me, leaving me a hollow shell. They buried me in the village churchyard beneath the shadow of the old church. No one comes to visit my grave. They say the Siren Head still roams the moors, searching for its next victim. And they say that if you listen closely, on a cold, dark night, you can still hear my screams echoing across the desolate landscape, alone.